I'm Ben Data, CEO of Food Maven and a Denver Startup Week co-founder. Denver Startup Week has always been about community. And today, it's more important than ever to show how we can come together to create opportunities out of the challenges that we face. Opportunities for every member of the community. Before we dive in, we want to say a special thank you to our 2020 Denver Startup Week sponsors who make it all possible. Thanks to our title sponsors, Downtown Denver Partnership, JP Morgan Chase, Prologis, and Zero. And our track sponsors who have made all the great content you're hearing today possible. Battery 621 and the Public Works, Capital One Cafe, Colorado Lending Source, Friday Health, Quizlet, Exactly, Zayo, and Zestful. Our headline event sponsors are bringing the excitement this week. Thank you to Wix, Kenzen, MAPR Agency, Obsidian HR, Kickstart Fund, Promontory Mortgage, Molson Coors, and Comcast. Finally, thank you to our partner and member sponsors listed on the screen. Thank you for your support of Denver Startup Week. You help make all of this possible.
At Zayo, our fiber fuels global innovation. Everything we do, everything we can imagine. Never in history has innovation happened at such a rapid pace. And all of it depends on bandwidth connectivity. Millions of miles of Zayo's fiber span the globe, traveling unique routes, providing dense metro footprints, offering next-generation solutions. We didn't just see the future of fiber, we built it. We delivered it. Every millisecond, our fiber is fueling crucial operations, breakthroughs, and innovations for the world's most impactful companies. Companies that are disrupting the status quo, igniting imaginations, revolution. Industries and creating brand new ones. Our customers are advancing wireless communication, transforming healthcare, changing education, revolutionizing transportation, redefining banking, powering retail, and upping the game in esports. These innovators rely on Zayo's fast, secure fiber networks to connect their offices, factories, data centers, clouds, exchanges, venues, and more. Ultimately, fueling innovation and transforming lives. And behind those fiber connections, Zayo is all about human connections. We take ownership in all we do. Our employees take the initiative to deliver trusted solutions to every customer and make their experience effortless. We are energetic and entrepreneurial, a partner to rely on. We are Zayo. We are working with our customers on what comes next, constantly anticipating what can be. We are fueling global innovation that is changing the world.
Hello and welcome to the Denver Startup Week Healthcare Fireside Chat. My name is David Perez. I'm joined today by two good friends, Andy and Heather. I'll have them introduce themselves to you here in a moment. But I am fortunate enough today to come to you, one, representing the Blackstone Entrepreneurs Network. The Blackstone Entrepreneurs Network is there to support scaling up companies throughout Colorado. I'm on the board of directors and serve as vice chair. And prior to that, I worked for many years as the CEO of Terumo BCT. If you've been around Colorado for a while, we were the old Cobe Laboratories that became Gambro, that went through a private equity journey, and we became Caridian BCT, and then we were acquired by Terumo. And so I ran the global blood business for Terumo, as well as serving on the Terumo Corporation Board of Directors. Today, I serve on the board of 4 private equity companies, along with 1 public company. But here today, I'm really excited to represent the Blackstone Entrepreneurs Network. So let me have our panelists introduce themselves real briefly. So Andy?
I'm Andy Altorfer. I am one of the co-founders and the CEO of CirrusMD. We've been around for going on 9 years. We are a text-first version of telemedicine and have historically been predominantly working in the payer space, working with large insurance companies. We work about half of the top 10 insurers in the country and have recently moved into direct-to-employer. And our goal has always been to make accessing care as easy as just sending a text message.
I'm Heather Potters. I am the co-founder and vice chairman and chief business development officer, lots of titles, of PharmaJet, which is a needle-free jet injection technology. And we are focused on immunizations. So highly relevant today, especially under the coronavirus scenario. Generally, we have off-the-shelf needle-free products to use so you can go get your flu shot at the pharmacy. But we also are involved globally in the polio eradication initiative, where our technology has been able to prove that actually a fractional dose into your skin, 60% less, is superior in immune response. So in some cases, we actually make vaccines work better. And we have more than 100 novel developments today in novel vaccines and cancer therapies coming towards market state. And 18 of those are for COVID candidates touching 9 countries. So exciting times for us.
Well, as you can see, we have 2 excellent panelists, and they really help to define the Blackstone Entrepreneurs Network. It's all about how do we support the scaling up community here in Colorado, and both these companies are classic examples of that. So let me dive into some questions. I start off saying, I spent a lot of time in Japan, being on the board of Tokyo, and it's interesting, the Japanese word for crisis, when you see it interpreted, it includes both opportunity and challenge. And I'd like to maybe hear an example or two from both of you about opportunity and challenge in this COVID environment and how you're dealing with it. So Andy, let's start with you.
Sure. It is. It's a very symbiotic relationship. With struggle comes opportunity. And I'm a firm believer in that. And for us, this has been a very fascinating journey. We're on the front line of the COVID response. We're in telemedicine. We are providing direct care to patients on an on-demand basis in the face of a brick and mortar landscape that's largely been shut down. 80% of the brick and mortar healthcare facilities in this country shut down as part of COVID. And that caused a surge in utilization overnight. We saw about a 400% immediate increase when the lockdown happened in daily utilization. Wow. And operationally, that's challenging. Our industry as a whole has thrived as part of COVID because the concept of virtual care, while it has existed for a long time, really began to take shape in the lack of access to care that a lot of people were having. And as we watched this market really advance about a decade, in the course of a few weeks, most of our competitors ground to a halt. They have more synchronous models using video or phone calls, and as a result, they could not scale physicians quickly enough. Part of the beauty of our text approach is that the provider can manage multiple people at one time, and we managed to sub 60-second response times through the heart of COVID, which was an incredible opportunity and has reinforced a lot of the things that we've always talked about as to why our model is superior. And this was an opportunity for us to prove ourselves.
Fantastic. Heather, how about you? An example of both opportunity and challenge for PharmaJet?
Oh, 1,000%. It's like that 2 sides of a coin, right? So given that we're focused on immunization and have been since the beginning, I feel like we've arrived at that unique time with this pandemic scenario where people understand now that some of the basics, core immunization, is really inextricably linked to economic health and prosperity. And while not everyone agrees, and vaccines can be a little controversial, the exciting thing for us on the opportunity side is that it's unleashing the ability to bring potential vaccine solutions in lightning speed. Normally, the rule of thumb is that it's about a decade or more to develop a drug or a vaccine and bring it to market. And to be able to do that, look back within about a year's worth of time and see that there's a coronavirus solution is really cool. So while we may or may not be part of some of those solutions, and arguably probably outside the United States, we have more activities than we do here, I think it's a tremendous opportunity. It will unleash our entire portfolio of nucleic acid vaccines, where we oftentimes make things work better. So that's exciting. And then, frankly, on the other side, we have been working diligently as part of the polio eradication initiative to engage with the ministries of health in multiple countries. And give you a great example, we shipped about 2.3 million needle-free syringes to Pakistan in March. It would have been the second mass immunization event in that country. where they were planning to immunize 1.5 million kids in about a week, door to door. And that's been on and off again now twice, and they've officially postponed it to 2021. So the sad thing around the social distancing is that certain programs have been curtailed, and the kind of knock-on effect is that actually disease incidence is increasing. So I would argue that as much as it's painful for us today to not be able to fire on all cylinders and provide everything we want to these countries, the longer term will actually be reinforced, coming back to that kind of premise of immunization's pretty core and pretty basic.
Right. I want to maybe shift gears a little bit and talk about the regulations that we all deal with. Any of us that are in healthcare, we know we have to deal with the FDA here in the United States and other government agencies around the world. But let's maybe talk for a moment about how the FDA, and look, right now I think we see great examples of how the FDA, through emergency use authorizations, bringing out antibody tests, antigen tests, convalescent plasma. I really do believe, having spent a lot of years working with the FDA, they really do want to bring out safe and effective products. But we all know it can be a challenge to work through some of the regulations. So Andy, how is the FDA helping or hindering you right now during COVID?
So it's certainly opened up a lot of new avenues. That said, we have really, to a large degree, held ourselves to a pre-COVID standard, because as we offer both a technology service and a clinical service, we don't want to get into habits that are not going to be scalable beyond COVID. And so there is a great freeing effect that's taken place across the FDA, across CMS, across HIPAA violations have been waived. All kinds of things have changed as part of COVID. A lot of state regulations that impact cross-state telemedicine, things that really impact us, have all had a lot of waivers. That said, as we continue to develop processes and scale our company, we've taken an approach that, hey, we believe a lot of this stuff may revert to the mean after COVID is determined to be gone. And I would say it's had marginally positive but limited effects, mostly because of how we've chose to manage through it. That said, you guys may have a very different story on that, given that you're directly FDA supervised.
Indeed. So we work with both the device division and then the biologics division. And, in the past, because again, science is glacial, it takes such a long time to bring vaccines forward and complete the studies. I think we've whined a lot about one more study, how many more months does it take? And the exciting thing, I guess, is that to be able to observe from afar, the FDA is fast-tracking things, because when they need to move quickly, they can. And I think that is so exciting. And yet, on the other side, we don't expect that there's going to be any slack for PharmaJet. We still need to show up. We need to be able to prove definitively safety, efficacy, non-inferiority. That's the bar. And then, frankly, the interesting thing potentially to come is oh my gosh, what if we actually make the vaccines work better? So we have two device platforms, and the intradermal kind of injection as an alternative to intramuscular, rule of thumb, is about 80% less is the same in immune response. So we have the opportunity to be able to potentially stretch the dose. But what if all of a sudden we make things work so much better than needles that they say, we'll just go with PharmaJet? I think there is a host of discussions to come with the FDA about the fact that we're unusual. And so that means that our path isn't fully straightforward. It's exciting, though, because we certainly are very, very relevant to what's going on today.
Now, reimbursement is another critical aspect of all of us trying to get our products out there to the market to serve more customers and ultimately to serve more patients. I always like to say you got to follow the money. So tell us, how do you follow the money for digital health? And kind of explain, how do you get paid and how do you see reimbursement in a COVID environment, and are you going to see some sustainable, durable impacts going forward?
Yeah, and this ties directly into what we were just talking about. I mean, there's been a lot of CMS waivers that are allowing for telemedicine parity. Doctors are getting reimbursed for codes that are in-office codes that don't necessarily fit traditional telemedicine. And it's been a huge impact on our industry. We have always operated a little bit outside of the traditional reimbursement paradigm. Most of telemedicine has been designed around the concept of what if we package an office visit into video and make that happen. It's a very discrete, finite event. We can reimburse around that. And our presumption from the beginning was my co-founder Blake, who's an ER doctor, was texting with his friends and family about all their medical concerns. And it's more about how do people communicate and how do we package that into healthcare versus recreating that reimbursable office visit in a video format or something else. And so we started at a very different place. As a result, most of our models have been with people who are financially at risk for care and are looking to save money versus people who are trying to generate revenue off of telemedicine. And so we've largely fallen outside of reimbursement. But what we're starting to see through a lot of advocacy by ourselves, others in the industry, CMS, which the misnomer in this country is that we don't have some nationalized form of medicine. The reality is everything is pegged to Medicare reimbursement, which is set by CMS. The federal government controls pricing in this market. And they are starting to put forward CPT codes that allow for a 7-day window for reimbursement around text conversations. So the market is beginning to look at new modalities and new ways of doing things that replicate meeting the consumer, the end user, the patient, where they want to be. And a lot of that is accelerated as part of COVID. There's been a lot of waivers that have been granted that have created some laterality. Our focus is much more on the long term. How do we make this a sustainable, ongoing business model before we invest heavily on thinking about our reimbursement strategy? Because in the interim, we can do PMPM, PEPMs, those types of pricing models, which are well accepted for people who are at risk for cost of care.
Great, thanks. Heather, help us understand the money flow or follow the money for your business.
Well, on one hand, it's actually slightly simpler, and then on the other side, completely complex. But the reimbursement codes, the CPT reimbursement codes for an injection are the same whether or not it's needle or needle-free.
Oh, interesting.
So we don't have anything necessarily to do with the vaccine. We're not the vaccine company. So when a caregiver is going to be providing a needle-free injection, they'll use the same standard. So I think that makes it a lot easier.
So who pays PharmaJet?
We actually have paying customers in the form of pharmacies, doctors' offices, and then outside the U.S., it would be governments primarily. However, we're in a really unique circumstance for our polio scenario where Gavi, which is the Global Alliance for Vaccine Initiative, funded by the 15 largest countries in the world, they subsidize immunization in 74 countries. And Gavi's agreed to subsidize our product for any country that wants to use it for polio. Okay. So we have it's a huge channel for us, and it's exciting that these applications are now going in. Our partner ends up being in part the country for implementation, but we don't take any risk. It's like sovereign currency, essentially. So there's more to come, but I would say that the business model for us, we're too small and we need to be focused on the larger channels. So primarily, frankly, government channels.
You know, it's so great to see two companies here that are growing and scaling, you know, to meet the needs of the COVID pandemic. You know, they're serving more customers, they're serving more patients. But with that growth comes scale-up challenges. So, Andy, you know, one of the things you and I were talking about, access to talent, but I'm sure there's other scale-up challenges. So I'm going to ask both of you to give us some examples of, this is exciting about all this explosive growth, but how are you managing the scale-up challenges?
Yeah, I mean, we are easily having our fastest growth year that we've ever had as a company. I mean, so in some ways, this has been a very positive outcome for a company, but recruiting is radically different. I mean, we're hiring people that we've never met in person before. I am not fully comfortable with that dynamic, but it's just the way things have to work. Fundraising, we are about to embark on a significant fundraise. That's all going to be done virtually, doing that on Zoom. And that's where the VC community is today, and that should go just fine. but it is a different way, and video presence and screen presence is maybe a different thing than in-person presence. There are things that we're even training our sales force around in that same paradigm. How do you present better via video? How do you engage people? How do you interact with people differently? Because it may not be the same as it's always been. And the other thing is just access to customers. I mean, hey, we're popping by your headquarters, large insurance company based in city XYZ. And while we're there, we're going to schedule 10 other meetings because we happen to be there for something you guys wanted us to come for. And that's a very favorable thing. Well, now those other 10 meetings have to be very independent events, not a, hey, I'm going to be in your building. So there's literally impacts in every area of our organization, except maybe finance and accounting, in how we core operate our business. And it's not a huge challenge. You just have to be flexible and think about it a little bit differently.
Great. Heather, imagine scaling up manufacturing has got to be a big opportunity and challenge. So maybe some insights on how you're doing that.
Exciting times again, and I can't take full credit because I'm not the engineers, and they pull off stunning developments. But our model's always been that we have great contract manufacturing partners. They own all the overhead, the regulatory, our robotics and molds are on their footprint, and that seems to have worked well. We actually have a partner in Wisconsin today, and our next scale up would be Singapore. So that next scale up is actually going okay from the perspective that there's a liaison partner in California. It's not too far away. And then that next leap, I think, is one where we may end up having some full-time dedicated people on site to do certain aspects of that implementation to make sure that it goes really well. But in our world, when you create something, it takes a long time to perfect. And once you've done it, then you can do it again. And so we do have that going for us. And I have to kid David for a second, but we're actually looking for an operations person, and there are two people that we would, if you were still in charge at your former company, we would poach them.
So, Andy, you talked about fundraising, but Heather, I know you're probably doing some fundraising. Are there challenges fundraising in this environment, or are you seeing more people coming to you to support the company in response to COVID?
I think we are unusual in that our time is now, immunization, et cetera, et cetera. So while there was probably about a 3 or 4 week lull with institutional investors kind of saying, I need to focus on our portfolio, we'll get back to you, but we're really excited about what you do. The truth is that the individuals filled in the gaps there because they can decide on their own what they want to do. And we're a hybrid. We've raised $65 million from high net worth family office investors to date, and we are on the cusp of completing a big institutional round, and we're spoiled for choice. We have about 7 investor prospects and 3 term sheets, and so the ship's moving again. And more than that, it's really joyous to be able to find the right money, right alignment, right purpose, versus perhaps before where I think it was a bit of a struggle. People thought this big grand plan of immunization everywhere was a stretch, especially if they're focused on the United States, and not anymore.
And I know you're doing a round. Are you seeing a new type of investor coming forward, or is this some of your traditional investors that are going to support you in this next round?
It's mostly more traditional investors. I think the net has widened a little bit. Mm-hmm. We haven't officially kicked off our fundraise yet. That'll happen here shortly. But the amount of inbound interest that we're seeing, and again, we're in a very hot sector. We're in the front lines of COVID. Our market has had a radical inflection point. I mean, virtual care, 2 years ago, they were talking about it as being a $35 billion market. McKinsey just released a study showing it's more like a $200 billion market. Wow. I mean, there's radical change in the understanding of how care can be delivered. As a result, I get a half dozen inbounds a day right now, and part of what we're doing is sorting through how are we even going to prioritize all this, because we can't even talk to all of the folks who are coming inbound to us unprompted. which is a very fortunate place to be in an era when so many VC-backed companies are struggling. I mean, we feel very blessed to be in the position that we're in, but it almost changes how you need to manage the process. That said, I would expect whoever leads our round is probably somebody that's been dialoguing with us for 2 or 3 years already. That's just how it works.
Sure. So I think many of the folks in the audience are probably, companies that have board of directors, and we all of us have experience working with our board. So give us some examples. We'll start with you, Andy. How have the board dynamics changed? How is your board supporting you or challenging you, during this time?
Yeah, certainly challenge to grow faster, grow bigger. This is your moment, like you said. You guys need to be able to position yourselves to grow very rapidly through this. And we have, and it's been a very positive thing. I think the biggest thing for us is we made a decision at the end of last year to move into the direct-to-employer market versus just focusing on large insurance companies, which is what we've largely done over the past 8 years. And that new initiative has gone incredibly well. We launched with Target, which is one of the largest employers in the country, and that's gone exceptionally well. In some cases, they're bigger than an insurance company. Utilization's been off the charts. We've determined an entire underlying basis of behavioral health needs that are largely COVID-driven. About a third of what we're seeing for physical health presentation have underlying behavioral concerns that the patient themselves may not know about. So we've learned a lot about that, but as we've moved into that, one of our board members comes from Livongo, and she has been incredibly supportive and also insightful. Hey, the employers are gonna wanna own this era of healthcare because they care about absenteeism, they care about the safety of their employees, they care about COVID outbreaks. The risk profile's changed, and we believe that's presented a huge opportunity. And so there's one board member in specific that we have relied heavily on based on past experience, which is why you ought to have a diversified board of people who can help, because this was not even something that we really talked about until Q4 of last year. We started it this year, and it really is where we're focusing most of our forward growth path on, in a way that we maybe never would have anticipated, but in a way COVID has opened the opportunity to do that.
Oh, thank you. Now, Heather, how about your board? Now, full disclosure, the chairman of her board's a dear friend of mine, so we could talk a little dirt, but talk to us about how your board's supporting the rapid growth of the company.
Yeah, well, we're very fortunate to have super experienced chairman. Been there, done that. GE, Thermo Fisher, lots of companies merged, sold, grown. And I think because he digs in every day with us, it makes a huge difference, and it also helps coordinate, I think, the impact of the interaction with our board members. So unlike most places, we have a lot of people who have invested heavily in PharmaJet and then have a seat at the table. Also, unlike kind of standard companies that are funded by high net worth, most all of those people come from heavy investment backgrounds. So we kind of have this interesting blend. And for us, we've recently added an individual who used to be, she's newly retired, one of our vaccine collaboration partner leaders. And now from the inside, she's a PharmD. She's hugely connected. She's been responsible for pandemic preparedness activities for her former company. And it's that sage leadership and connections, that extra reach that we haven't had before. And so we're planning to do more of that. And then in terms of just challenges, I think probably there's this level of hopeful excitement that, again, our time is now. We have a very supportive board, and they're not shy about asking questions and pushing us hard, but we already do that from the inside.
Good, well, thank you. Now, we only have a couple minutes left, so I want to wrap up with one question for both of you. And this has been just an unprecedented time, and I'm sure you've learned a lot about your company, and you learned a lot about yourselves as leaders. So maybe give us one example of what did you learn about the company through COVID, and what did you learn about yourself as a leader that you'll be able to carry forward as you continue to grow and lead the company. So let's start with you, Andy.
Sure. I would just say resiliency. I mean, our clinical team, for example, overnight, we have 4x more patients They just made it happen. I mean, and that without substituting quality or efficiency or ease of access. We had a doctor right when shutdown happened. She managed 81 patients in an 8-hour shift. That, outside of our approach to the telemedicine model or healthcare in general, probably has never happened before. Mm-hmm. That is an insane amount of care delivered by one individual in a relatively short shift.
Yep.
And we have, case after case of that where people just stepped up and said, we're going to get through this, we're going to grind through it, and we're going to make it happen. And I think broadly, shifting everybody to an at-home work environment. We had a lot of fear. What is it going to look like? We have some older thinking folks in our senior leadership team who, hey, like FaceTime, like people being in the office. What's going to happen when everybody's at home for weeks on end, months on end now? We got more productive. Our throughput has been better across every single functional area by having people at home. And you start to question, well, was the old way we were doing things really the right way? Mm-hmm. Where, I think there's people are bored of being at home at this point in the shutdown. But at the same time, man, our employees stepped up and got it done across the board, and our clinicians stepped up. And that, to me, the flexibility and also desire to help people through this complicated situation was really the most refreshing aspect of what we've seen.
Great. Well, bring us home, Heather. What have you learned about the company, and what have you learned about yourself as a leader through this COVID crisis?
One of the interesting things is that we have a relatively small crew of people who have their own personal high expectations. Like they always are shooting to get an A on their paper. And it used to be that when we were in the office, it was really, really quiet, and everybody was working really hard. And now we're all home, and it's still working. And I would argue that we're also working harder now that we're at home, right? We don't have to commute and all the rest. So I think this concept of kind of stretching the boundaries in a different sort of a way, working more virtually. We had a tremendous example of one of our clinician team members provide training for 100 people remotely in India recently and kick off a clinical study. We would never have done that before. We would have had somebody on an airplane making sure everything was going okay. But the truth is we designed our equipment to be really simple. So up against the arm, push and click, self-training, and that's working. And so I think it's really exciting for us going forward. It's just one more proof of concept that what we set out to do is certainly possible.
Well, thank you both. So on behalf of the Blackstone Entrepreneurs Network, Andy, I want to say thank you. Heather, I want to say thank you. Great stories, great insights, great examples. And we want to say thank you to the Denver Startup Week. Hopefully you found this fireside chat insightful, informative, and we really sincerely appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today. Have a good week.
Thank you.
So Andrew, Heather, I don't know if you guys can hear me. This is Kay, but that was amazing.